This week, Emmet and Kumar discuss Far Sector by N.K. Jemisin and Jamal Campbell. The book uses the Green Lantern concept to comment on race relations and the police in the U.S. Emmet and Kumar also discuss how Jemisin, a novelist, compares with other prose writers who have taken on comics. But first, if you're enjoying this podcast, we'd love it if you'd support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. All patrons get our bi-weekly videos of 20th century TV trivia, more perks and bonus content at higher donation levels, including discussions of MCU movies and Lee Ditko Spider-Man stories, and help us meet our goals to unlock the earliest episodes of our podcast and put them all back in the feed. Pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics.
This is Emmet.
And this is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Emmet and Kumar. How are things, Kumar?
Pretty good.
We're both in Victoria, which is under lockdown again. This is
almost. We're 4 hours away from the snap.
4 hours away, you're correct. Midnight tonight at the time of recording. And supposedly 5 days of this joy awaits us. So I feel it's appropriate that we're going to talk about a comic which is set very far, far away.
Wow, I didn't even put that together, but it's totally true. There's nobody from Sydney sneaking out to the Far Sector, that's for sure.
Yeah, so tonight we're going to be talking about N.K. Jemisin and Jamal Campbell's Far Sector, which is, despite the title, a Green Lantern book, published with DC Comics. It's focused on an original character set in a quadrant of space that has previously not been explored. So it's more or less an entirely original story, but it's got the ideas or the concepts of the Green Lantern woven into it. And it's written by somebody who I think it's fair to say would be more known as a prose stylist.
Yeah, well, she won, for her 5th season books, she won the Hugo Award 3 times in a row for the 3 books. And I think she's the only person who's ever done that. I don't think any other science fiction trilogy has won all 3 like that. What do we think about novelists who write comics in general? Before we get into it. Because it happens sometimes. They bring them in because they think they're going to make money or something. And there was the Jodi Picoult Wonder Woman, which people didn't really like very much. And I'm trying to think. There's some other examples that are not coming immediately to mind.
Well, I mean, the other example would be Joss Whedon's comics work as well.
Well, lots of screenwriters and movie writers come in too, but
there was a flood of those.
Yeah,
and Stephen King's had a crack. He did American Vampire and things like that.
Okay.
So the writers. I mean, the one I would probably stump for would be Samuel Delaney's Wonder Woman run.
Oh right. Okay. Yep.
Which he did with Denny O'Neil, or under Denny O'Neil's aegis, and I'm a big. As we've talked off the show, Kumar, I'm a big Samuel Delaney fan.
Sure.
And so I checked out his Wonder Woman stuff, and it's not particularly known. And he has a crossover in the book with some Fritz Lieber characters.
Okay.
I know how to pronounce it. Faherd
and Greymouser, yeah.
Yeah, the Greymouser. Yeah, they're in a Wonder Woman comic.
Okay.
So, he brings to it his sensibility and his sense of what was going on in the 70s at the time. It's a respectable effort. I think it's... And Samuel Delaney certainly wasn't I wouldn't consider him to be a best-selling author.
Sure.
Right? And he would have been respected more than commercially revered.
Yeah.
So Jemisin is sort of halfway between those two I've just mentioned, between Stephen King, who's got all that commercial backing, and Samuel Delaney, who's more sort of the critical backing.
Mm-hmm.
You've got N.K. Jemisin, who is somebody who is both popular. She's got Twitter game. She's known for getting involved in online spats.
Yeah.
would not to denigrate her as well. She's taking the positions, which is good. But also she's a successful prose stylist.
I just remember Joe R. Lansdale wrote a bunch of Jonah Hex comics, and they're pretty great.
He certainly did. He's done some other Western stuff too, which is very, very good.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say he's also adapted some of his own work to comics. So sorry, carry on.
But okay, so here we are, N.K. Jemisin. So I'm always a bit suspicious coming in about people who don't know about sequential art coming in and just being hired to do these jobs. Also, it's part of DC's Young Animal line, and I don't know what this is. Do you know what it is?
I think I remember reading a bunch of them.
Okay.
And
as far as there's swearing in it. That's the thing. This is a Green Lantern comic where they use the F word and stuff once in a while.
It's the Jared Way run.
Okay.
So Jared Way, who's a musician, he used to be an intern at DC Comics, and he's something of a Grant Morrison acolyte, and he came back into the fold, came back to DC Comics having had such success in music and Umbrella Academy, and that's now spin off into a Netflix show. So he's got himself his own little multimedia empire emerging.
So is there a ideology behind this line of comics or something?
I would suggest thinking of it as a attempt to do a 2010s early Vertigo style.
Okay.
Or somebody who came through that era remembers it.
Right.
Because, he had a Doom Patrol book in the mix as well. So, it's very much, it's of that kind of, more experimental fiction within the DC sphere, not necessarily tied into the mainstream stuff, but is, like the Green Lantern book we're talking about, on the periphery. It's there. It's in the mix.
Yeah. Okay. And let's, before we get into it too, let's talk a little bit about Green Lantern. In general, I like Green Lantern. I haven't read a ton of Green Lantern comics, but I love the green. I love the design. I love all the ideas of it. So I was totally looking forward to that. And were you were reading the Grant Morrison run, weren't you? Or did you keep reading that? Or
I didn't continue with it, but and Liam Sharp has just so we're on top of what's going on in the world right now, and I do apologize not having more coherent notes for this, but Liam Sharp, who's the artist on the Green Lantern book, he was successful in his Kickstarter campaign for a I think it was Cats. I'm going to confirm the artist's name, but Liam Sharp is somebody who I have a lot of respect for, and he was an interesting artist. And I think whatever you may feel about Morrison and Morrison's ideas, Liam Sharp's art in the Green Lantern book was incredible.
Okay.
And that was certainly a reason enough to pick out the Green Lantern book. But my issue with it was I felt as if Grant Morrison, or they, had taken an approach to Green Lantern which was a bit too in keeping with that Invisible style of sly, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, ironic posturing around fascism. Around the idea of a space cop being a thug. Yeah. And I wasn't comfortable with that initial issue, because I felt like that's sort of leaning into the Hal Jordan of it all, and inflating it perhaps for comic effect. But I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy the experience of reading it. Yeah. And then you've got this book which also tackles that.
Yeah. Well, it's real. Yeah. I mean, Green Lantern is. I was thinking, why N.K. Jemisin? Why Green Lantern? But I mean, as I started reading, I was like, it kind of came together. Okay, yeah, Green Lantern is a cop. There's the space police, and it was. You think back to Hard Traveling Heroes. It's always the image, but that speech about the you always save the purple people and the blue people. Why don't you do anything for the brown people? That he gets from that old man in the street. So it kind of has that. That racial history, let's say, that it has at least tried to come at this stuff from some angle at some stage, even 40, 50 years ago. So it's kind of an interesting fit, I think.
I mean, it's about authority. It's about power. It's about the exercise of both. I mean, sorry, I feel I waffled there before because I was trying to call up the campaign that Liam Sharp was behind. It was the Unseen Jack Katz.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
so I don't know if you're familiar with Jack Katz.
I am, yeah.
Yeah, really interesting artist, very strange stuff.
Yeah.
But Sharp has put together this beautiful collection of some of the unfinished work from one of his strange, surreal space epics.
Okay.
And he just met that campaign. He's just successful. And I'm quite impressed that not only is Liam Sharp putting out work of his own, which I feel owes something to Katz's physicality, I think is fair to say, but that he would then back this comics elder, if you like, and use this opportunity where he's got this goodwill from Green Lantern, from doing a book with Grant Morrison, from being sort of in the comics news sphere more readily, to use that opportunity to say, hey, Jack Katz is still alive. You should be supporting him. He's old.
Right.
Let's send some money his way. So I just wanted to shout him out. I really respect him for doing that.
Right. Okay. So where do we want to start with this? So you did kind of describe a little bit of the plot. So you've got a brand new Green Lantern. Her name is Jo, which is short for Sojourn. And she was a soldier. Then she became a cop. And then she quit being a cop because her partner beat the crap out of an unarmed, maybe protester, or maybe just, I don't know what. He was a shit cop. And she quit, and then she was kind of discovered by this other Green Lantern or Guardian or whatever, and given a ring, and she's been given this assignment. I have to say, I love her costume.
Oh, yes. And it points to Jamal Campbell for that, because the costume, I think this is a common feature of Green Lantern. He tends to, and it's usually a man, Green Lantern tends to create like a domino mask using the ring to disguise his identity, so it's just covering part of his face, whereas she will create like a rain outfit. She'll create these funky shades she wears, or she's more creative in how she uses the ring sartorially, I think.
And that's kind of, it's supposed to be part of Green Lantern, is the ring is powered by your creativity as well as your willpower. So I think this is the first time anybody's really tackled it in that way around the costumes. It does. The jacket sometimes looks a bit like Guy Gardner's outfit, which I absolutely love as well. So right off the bat, I love that visual of it. So we're out here at this region way out that's maybe even outside of Guardian jurisdiction. And there's 3 species in this mega city of 20 billion people. They call it a city.
There's more, isn't there? There's more species. There's at least several.
Okay, but there's 3 major ones though, because there's the ones with the fly, the organic ones with the wings.
Yeah.
And then you've got the ones that are kind of plant creatures, which I didn't put together until, and this is going to be one of my minuses about the book, until sometimes it took me 2 or 3 issues to realize that, they're plant people. And then there's like kind of digital beings that can manifest. You've
got the cannibals as well, like the vampiric people.
Well, I thought the cannibals were the plant people, weren't they?
There was also I thought you meant the people who we see serving fast food occasionally. They're like a sort of vegetable-based herbivore type people, I assume. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they are the vampire people. But you raise an interesting point, and I think this is going to be one of our sort of freewheeling conversations. But I think it's worth noting that the way, dear listener, the way Kumar just laid everything out for you, does not actually come into focus until maybe the 3rd or 4th issue.
Yeah.
You talked about how Jo was recruited. You talked about the sector they're in. You talked about all this stuff is drip fed out, and that's what I find is interesting. And maybe we can loop back to this, but what I find interesting with Jemisin as a comics writer is I feel that she's she's using. I've read some of her stuff, and I've read some of her short fiction as well. Just like I read Dirt Witch, which is a short piece she did, and I think has some bearing on this, and they have explore a very similar theme, the city of utopia. But what I find interesting about her is that in her prose, and particularly in contemporary science fiction, there's more. I think there's more understanding for a degree of ambiguity that the reader will be happily content with up until the very last page. I mean, it's very much in the tradition of Ursula Le Guin, where you have the sudden revelation that gender was actually completely flipped from what we understand gender to be,
right?
Which is something of a number of other ancillary justice and stuff like that have come out recently. These books are exploring some of those ideas now more readily, and Jemisin as well has this thematic focus. She has this idea of affect in her writing, but she won't get into the meat and potatoes of plot and world building and setup the way traditional science fiction maybe would have done. And certainly the way comic books are known for front loading with, like the opening page.
Yeah.
This is the situation. This is more drip fed to the reader.
Which I
don't think it's a good or bad thing. I think it's worth noting. This is not going to be your typical DC Comics reading experience.
And sometimes, like, I didn't figure things out until the recap of the following issue. Oh, that's what that was, or like there's a thing where they go into the AT-ATs are the digital creatures.
Yes.
And they go into their world. And then the next issue, there's all this talk about how it was like a slum. And I'm like, oh, it was? And I think maybe there's a part of that is a drip feed, but part of it is it's very the art is so glossy all around, nothing looks like a slum. And there's like one panel where she's talking to some homeless people, and it's kind of in a corner, and it was very difficult to notice it. And it wasn't until I flipped back after these comments and looked at the world again that I kind of saw that it was there. But in her novel Fifth Season, there's like she builds this whole world, but there's some huge plot revelations that you don't get till the very end of the book. And I was kind of suspicious that, maybe this is what's going on. And then you realize that the whole thing that you've been reading was not what you thought it was. The 500 pages was actually, the organization of it was not what you thought. And the people you thought you were following were not them at all. And it's a huge thing at the end of the book, not at the front. And this is interesting because I think there's a lot of world here. There's all sorts of stuff going on, but it's not. You're very much thrown into it. You don't really know who the species are. Like, I didn't figure. Like, did I say already that I didn't figure out the plant people were plant people until like 3 issues later? So, and even the stuff. There's a major plot point is we have to talk about the emotions and stuff. But these people have suppressed their emotions supposedly with this genetic manipulation called the emotion exploit, but some people are turning that off with a drug called switch off. And they mentioned switch off in issue 1, but I think it wasn't until like issue 2 maybe that I figured out that it was a drug or what it was.
And then later on we have another concept which is introduced, which is this sort of sensorium type place.
Right.
Where, and I don't want to get into that because it contains spoilers, but our understanding of what's going on continues to evolve. And I don't think we necessarily are on the same page as Jo, because Jo, she can understand what people are saying around her. She understands the languages. She can read text that's clearly an alien script. We can't, but her ring is translating for her, or sometimes she has an implant, which is telling her what's happening. So there's this, it keeps you on your toes as far as being a reader of this. You're constantly going, there is this stimulation through, I don't quite know what's going on. And then Jemisin takes the step of, introducing desire and the idea of attraction for Jo and other characters. And that sort of grounds all of this a bit. I found that quite interesting too, that there are a number of possible romances teased here. And I think if this was gender swapped, I wouldn't even blink at it. I'd be going, oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Hot dude, hot chick, why not? Because that's what the tropes have built into us.
Yeah.
Whereas here, sexuality is more fluid and it's just a given, and desire is simply expressed as a fact. And this again is in a society where emotions are kept under control.
Let's talk about this emotion control business. I think this is another negative of the book for me. Well, maybe it's not negative. Maybe I'm not understanding it correctly. But my understanding was that this thing called the emotion exploit is a genetic thing which turns off their emotions. But they're having it the first time we hear about this thing. They're having a conversation where people are yelling at each other and are angry. And people, as far as I can tell, are constantly showing emotions. And I'm not sure. I started to doubt my understanding of what the emotion exploit was, because my feeling was that it was supposed to shut off emotions, but maybe it just dampens them somewhat? Or what was your take on this?
I am desperately Googling the name of this movie, which I think is Equilibrium. Remember Equilibrium?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Remember Equilibrium? So what I loved about that movie was you had the same premise, which is that order has been achieved in this city society based on the idea of controlling emotions. That people who can feel emotions lose control, and then from that you get chaos. And in this movie, you got Christian Bale playing this character. He's an enforcer. He's a cop, and
using gun kata.
Gun kata, yeah, the whole yes, I remember that. Everyone got excited about gun kata, Jesus. And they're hunting down this underground society of people who feel emotions, and people are like reading Yeats and crying and all this kind of stuff. But there's a character in this movie played by Taye Diggs. Taye Diggs is also one of these enforcers. He's also somebody who's repressing his emotions, but he keeps smiling.
Mm-hmm.
And he's doing that to provoke a reaction in you and to trip you up. And then you reveal that you are feeling emotions. And sometimes that's what I felt was going on. There were some characters in this book who I thought were deliberately provoking Jo, because she's the outsider.
Yeah.
And she's been treated in such a way that if they undermine her, they can say, oh, well, look, this person can't be interfering in our affairs. This outsider, this cop from another jurisdiction, from another precinct, they have no right to be here. I felt there was a bit of challenging going on. And then we also learn that some people aren't as emotionless as we thought they were. As you've already mentioned switch off, so that's in play too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it's all about control. So it's the control of emotion, it's the control of population, whether through violence or through just totalitarianism. And then later in this series, because it's a 12-issue maxi series, later into the series we get, as you say, we get more into the situation with the ATs, the AI species, who are starved of information. So that's how they're being controlled. And as you said, they're in a slum. And Jo, through her cultural output and the idea of memes gets introduced in the original sense of the word memes, the Richard Dawkins sense of the word memes, from The Selfish Gene, the idea of the meme is a unit of culture. So that sort of is introduced into this comic, where they are starving for the sensation of culture, and she is bribing an AI with cat memes, and when they go to this artificial world, this sort of underground space, this digital space, they are starving because they've got so little information. So she's almost like she's constantly changing and shifting, and I think she's introducing these ripples of culture into this world just by simply being there, manifesting these ideas of the Matrix and stuff like that. She's manifesting all these references she has to digital environments. So I thought there's lots of interesting ideas here about control and various manifestations of control. My question is, and this is no fault of Jamal Campbell, because I think he delivers on every front. But my question is, going back to what you're saying about a book author coming to a comic space, did this series have enough time to actually properly ground all these ideas, and I don't think it did.
No, I agree. Yeah.
I mean, I'm really impressed by it.
Yeah.
And it shows a degree of ambition which is lacking elsewhere.
This slum scene, which I had trouble understanding was a slum scene when I read it, needed 6 more pages with more close-ups and things like that. So it needed more than 12 issues, I think, to get into. And we're dealing with some huge concepts here, because there was the whole thing about the emotions. And the reason I brought that up right off the bat was because I was wondering, like, how does attraction work if you don't feel emotions? And that's another thing that we should have delved into even deeper. And, the memes, and then you've got this whole thing where memes are a currency. And then we haven't really talked too much about, there's all this business about protesting and police enforcement and all these things that we're dealing with right at this very minute in our culture. Are right front and center, but it's front and center with all of the other stuff about the memes and digital culture and emotions or not emotions, and whether people have a choice in all that. And there's so much going on. Even 12 issues is short for dealing with that. And you're on alien planets, and so you've got to establish all this alien technology and all this species and all that sort of stuff. And it's a lot to take in.
I had a couple of thoughts about this. Number one, I thought as you say, the idea of police violence and police being used as a tool of oppression on a population is introduced and is directly related back to police violence on our planet and in our world, in our society, and very recognizably portrayed as such. And my immediate question was, well, then why did she become a space cop?
Mm-hmm.
Because that same behavior is being enacted, in effect. The idea of there's constant little. She even comments on, when she manifests a sort of Green Lantern truncheon, she comments on the fact that, well, I'm aware this is inappropriate, problematic. I'm trying to be better than this, But this is kind of where my mind is automatically going, as you said. The ring manifests what you think, and in this position, when she's in the middle of a riot, her first thought is to create a truncheon, but then she overcomes it. And I thought, because that's baked into the Green Lantern concept, they're space cops, and they serve this sense of order, which is just about keeping a lid on things, which is kind of what Denny O'Neil was challenging with that Green Lantern story. It's like, why aren't you helping people?
Yeah.
Like, you've got all this power. Why do you help? You just keep things the way they are. I thought it would be interesting if she was a Star Sapphire.
Right.
So Star Sapphire, and typically, and I think Englehart, unfortunately, is quite guilty of this. You had a love interest in Hal Jordan's called Carol Ferris, and eventually Carol Ferris became ring bearer herself for the Star Sapphires, and their whole thing was all about love.
Mm-hmm.
And in Green Lantern, that's quite threatening and oppressive and bad. It's not good. I've always been fascinated by the Star Sapphires because I think they're really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they're a threat to the Green Lanterns because number one, they're all women.
Mm-hmm.
And it's danger, lads. And it is about a selfless love,
right?
And I think that's straying into sort of areas that maybe the writers were stigmatizing out of their own insecurities about desire or sex. I don't know. Maybe I haven't read enough. Maybe there's actually some really problematic element at play within the Star Sapphires. I don't know. But even within this story, Jo is recruited by a woman guardian.
Yeah.
And the guardians typically are all men, but or portrayed as such. But I thought, well, why wasn't she one of the, I think they're called the Zarons or Xanons or something like that. They've got their own backers, galactic backers. Why wouldn't she be a Star Sapphire? And then she goes to this place, this highly ordered place, and she's there to bring love because they're trapped within this prison of emotion. They can't feel emotion. And a Star Sapphire would come out there and break through that. Or maybe the simpler solution would just be to create a wholly original work for, boom, I don't know, someone else.
Yeah.
And just you have all these themes. Because this is barely related to anything that I think your typical Green Lantern reader would recognize.
Well, that's true. And in fact, her ring is even different. Like, it doesn't need to be powered by the lantern. She actually just recharges automatically, slowly over time, or something like that.
Potentially from her emotions.
Yes, like, through her will, the will. Yeah. So it's Green Lantern's always about willpower. I wonder if she chose... Again, I think Green Lantern was an interesting choice because of the hard traveling heroes stuff. But I think, was there... I mean, she's constantly justifying it through the 12 issues. Joe is constantly talking about why is she doing it. She's questioning it. I think Jemisin maybe was trying to find some redemption in the role of cop as well, or find a, not redemption, but maybe a proper execution of the role of what a police officer should do.
Yeah, and I think this is a difficult area for me to stray in to as a, lily white man. And no doubt I would feel pretty pissed off, Kumar, if an English person tried to explain the Irish experience to me.
Right.
So I'm going to try and tread carefully here. But that short piece I mentioned that I read, N.K. Jemisin, Red Dirt Witch. It's about this Black American family, and a lot of it is bound up with Irish mythology.
Okay.
With this idea of the fair folk, the kidnapping kids, and it's all about that, and it's about this bargain that's struck. It's all about this idea of dealing with the fair folk. And there's a moment when a character makes a choice, and the choice is between two paths into the future, and it's laid out so we understand this is actually our future. The future we're living in now.
Okay.
That's been decided by this fictional character. And in one version of history, the members of this family are brutalized, killed, victimized by white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
In the other version of history, which is our path, they are mistreated, beaten, but they survive. And a black man ends up in the White House.
Okay.
And that's a good.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I'm in my difficult ground here, because I appreciate how important that is. And I guess the Irish have something similar with Kennedy getting into the White House, because that was the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Can't have a papist in the White House. The Americans were crazy about that. Mm-hmm. But like looking at Obama's record as a symbol, hugely important, as an actual leader of the society, how much good did he do? Wow. Enacting, he is elected on a progressive ticket. How many progressive policies does he get over the line? Joe, I'm bringing this back around. Don't worry. Joe is supposedly allowing for these people to be liberated from the situation, but through her actions, how much has she actually allowed for the previous regime to just dig in even more? Is that deliberate within the text? Is that something which the text itself is aware of, conscious of, or because you seem to be saying that, well, it's not the best outcome, but it's what we got, and it's kind of how I feel about Obama, and it's kind of how I feel about Joe, where I'm kind of going, but you're still a cop.
Yeah.
You're still a cop, though. Yeah. That's why I mentioned Star Sapphires. I'm going, why couldn't this have been a revolution? This clearly unequal society. Why couldn't it have been a revolution?
Right. I think we're almost saying the same thing. Where I think she was trying to find the positive in it, in what she had to work with, if you know what I mean, like with the Green Lantern. I don't know if there's any easy answer to it.
I don't think there's any easy answers, but I do find it odd. This idea of noble forbearance sort of being laid out, if that follows.
Yeah.
And before I get in too much more trouble, let me just mention that the immortal race of warrior women who supported the Star Sapphires were the Zamorans. Zamorans, there you go.
Coming up, points in this book that aren't really clear, especially on the first read. How does novelist N.K. Jemisin stack up against other prose writers who have dipped a toe in writing comics? And more. Don't forget you can help to unlock classic early episodes of Deconstructing Comics, help me return all the old episodes to this podcast feed, and at the $4 level get access to hours of additional full-length podcasts. At the $10 level, you can review the book of your choice with me here on this show. Support Deconstructing Comics and our other shows at patreon.com/deconcomics. Or you can send a one-time donation via PayPal to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
Greetings from Wayne Manor Memoirs, a podcast dedicated to exploring the Batman mythos.
Each episode, we research a character, story, contributor, or piece of pop culture related or adjacent to the Dark Knight,
and try to understand why these topics are important to the Bat mythos. I'm Joe.
I'm Kendall, and some of our favorite topics include the transformation of Mr. Zero into Mr. Freeze,
the early appearances of the Riddler,
Booster Gold,
Commandi,
Jim Aparo,
and many, many more. Check out Wayne Manor Memoirs every other Friday, wherever you download your podcasts.
And follow us at Wayne Manor Memoirs on Facebook or at W Memoirs on Twitter.
Until next time, Bat Fanatics, be brave
and stay bold.
When was the Red Dirt story written? Do you know?
Well, it was, let me see, 2017.
Okay. So it was after... Trump,
I see your point.
After Trump was elected.
Yeah. It may have been written before.
Okay, sure.
But I think the collection is... It's volume 11 of the best science fiction and fantasy of the year, edited by Jonathan Strahan. And he collects Red Dirt Witch in this. So assuming it's come out in 2017, it's either from the year 2016 or 2017.
Hang on a second. Oh, no. Red Dirt, is it called Red Dirt Witch?
Correct.
Yeah, 2016 looks like the earliest. Okay, so... wow. I don't know what to make of... First published December 2016 in Fantasy Magazine. Wow.
What are you saying wow to?
I just don't know how to place it and what what was the author, how did the author feel at the time seeing Donald Trump on the verge of being elected or elected after Obama?
Isn't that the great debate? The idea being, you had this opportunity to do something. You merely kept the status quo in place. This is what happened. The other side, if you like, although I don't think that's a fair assessment because there's multiple factors involved, but the bastards, they don't have any such compunctions.
Yeah.
They'll just gut you and take what they want. And it's that hesitancy to actually do something and try and gain equality and respect and well-being of the mass of people, that's too hard. But apparently taking all the resources and means and money and all that security away from the mass majority of people, that's totes easy, guys. Not a problem.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there's election rigging in this comic too. I mean, it's got everything in it.
It's a very political comic. I mean, I'm not just throwing this stuff in.
No,
Jemisin is a political writer.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah, and this is all relevant, and yeah, 100%. That's sort of what I was trying to get at with all that stuff about Her Traveling Heroes. She is a political writer, and yeah, there's a whole thing about the election machines being rigged, and basically the AT-ATs, who are like the financial underclass are now even makes it even harder for them to vote because they have to manifest physical bodies in order to vote at these machines.
And Campbell literally depicts them like waiting these long lines.
Yes,
which we've seen, and at the time of recording, that is what's happening in the States. Again, like voting rights are being taken away from people. It's being made more difficult to vote. And people are attempting to protest this, but like it's happening. So these are two creators here addressing issues that I think are very relevant.
There was a line in there, I wish I didn't write it down, but there was something in there that really made me think of Haiti and what's been going on this week. But I can't remember. Anyway, never mind. Doesn't matter.
I think it's, look, can we focused on Jemisin quite a bit, and I think that's understandable because a lot of discussion in this book has been around her.
Sure.
But I want to give Campbell his due. As an artist, this is a spectacularly looking comic. It's a science fiction comic with some great visuals. There's a great use of space. It's also, I think, there's very intimate moments in terms of, and there's a dance scene with one of the Joe and one of the Na counselor have a dance, and that's quite a beautiful sequence.
Those scenes are the best scenes, I think. I think because some of the action scenes were a bit hard to follow for me, especially when she makes those Green Lantern constructs, which is what you're looking for. And there's stuff blasting each other, and it's kind of a bit like watching a Michael Bay Transformers movie where you can't tell what's what and what thing is hitting that thing.
Yeah. And what I was going to say was the dance scene reminded me of, was it Sophie Campbell's Gem comic? Oh my God, there's some amazing breakdowns of movement. Dance. That's a good comic, guy.
Yeah.
Don't laugh at me.
No, I hear you.
No, but I felt at times that this was a collaboration slightly out of step.
Okay.
In that you have an artist who has got this incredible control of the comics page, but I felt sometimes the things Jamal Campbell had been asked to do didn't cohere, and I don't think that's necessarily his fault. I think the page was overloaded with stuff that he had to do. As you say, towards the end, there's a spectacular conflict in this comic, but it's difficult to read. There are moments I didn't quite follow.
And how do you draw a city of 20 billion people? How do you draw a protest? It's so, a riot. This stuff is very difficult to get across on the page, especially if you've got computer coloring or something like that. And it's, I think, and the whole stuff with the combat, with the constructs, I think there has to be, I don't know if he needed more pages for it, or there needs to be more differentiation between the good guys and the bad guys, so to speak. In some way, because I was reading, and it's actually, I don't think it's only this. I feel like a lot of modern comics, when we do them for this show, sometimes I'm having trouble with art, especially if it's really spacey stuff like this. So yeah, I don't know. And anytime they're having a conversation, great. Anytime people are looking gaga at each other, great. Anytime she flies into a new area, I'm like, what exactly is happening? And, it's usually a 2-page spread of some sort, and all this sorts of stuff is going on. And, it's a bit... Again, the book is almost too big. There's too much high concept going on, maybe, for what he... that he's being asked to execute too much, maybe.
That's why I wondered if this was very much, something which would come alive on the page as prose through suggested imagery. Whereas being asked to actually draw it out can be difficult. There are characters who appear at certain points. They're not addressed, they don't have speaking, but they're meant, it's a callback to something that previously happened. but you may not necessarily follow that. I mean, you. I think this is a book which will maybe reward a reread.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
you start to recognize characters more, and you follow what's going on. But I did feel as if some of that was lost to me as a first time reader.
Yes.
The emotional impact of there's a sequence towards the end of the last issue where a person is being tended to by somebody who in security suit, and I think that's meant to be something I recognize. I don't know if that person was the brother looking for his sister. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But I felt like there was something more going on there that I was missing.
Yeah.
And maybe if I read it again, I'll go, oh, that's that person. That's what that is. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. Was thinking too, especially once it's revealed, because there's a bit of a mystery, like it starts with a murder. And once all that was revealed at the end, I was like, okay, I actually need to go back, because I didn't pay enough attention to the character that was the mastermind behind everything and all that sort of stuff. And there is a few places there are montages, and there's one like 2-page spread like where it's the aftermath of everything, and it seems like one of the city councilors has been disbarred or whatever, and I think he's supposed to be running away, hiding his face, but I wasn't really sure if that was looking at, but that's what the caption was kind of describing. And I think that's kind of similar to what you're describing. Yeah, it's hard to say because you can't fault the line work. There's something else going on with you. There's just so many characters. And then new characters, over 12 issues, new characters are introduced. Some are killed or whatever. So, yeah, it's a lot to keep track of. And it definitely probably second read would be rewarding, I guess.
And it's funny as well because similar to Peter David's work in X Factor, when Madrox was running a detective agency, and he keeps calling attention to the fact that he's a fan of film noir, and he starts commenting on, well, this is what happens in film noir, so this is what I'm going to do. Joe does the same thing. Joe's like, well, in film noir, this is what happens. So here, and there's a book I read a few years ago by Frederick Jameson, and it's a book all about Raymond Chandler.
Okay.
And there's this little quote I've just pulled out, and I thought I'd quickly read it to you, but there's a point I'm trying to make here. So it's a bit wordy, but here we go. And our formal distraction at last serves its fundamental purpose by diverting us with the ritual generic aim of the detection of the criminal and his transformation into the other. It is able to bring us up short without warning against the reality of death itself, stale death, reaching out to remind the living of its own mouldering resting place. What he's saying there is the detective, when they find the body, their sole concern is solving the nature of that crime. When they solve the crime, all they're then left with is the reality of the dead body. And your awareness that you're going to die too. Right? So you haven't, there's the suggestion that solving a murder victim's death, the mystery behind the murder victim's death, will somehow uncover the mystery of death itself. But every piece of detective fiction whips that away like in fucking Peanuts. And Charlie Brown lands flat in his face. And what I found interesting about this was this starts with a body, but then the body gets forgotten. Because it's not about. I mean, and it's interesting because the loved ones of the initial murder victim come back, and they're instrumental in the plot. But now it's a comic about politics. So that mystery isn't really a mystery. The mystery was the invitation into the world. Now we're going to have a talk about politics.
Right.
And I feel like it's a shift in gears, and it's sort of, it troubles me a bit because it's like, well, and I know Jameson's identifying a trope of detective fiction. I'm not saying all detective fiction has to follow this and all detective fiction has to somehow be this philosophical discussion of death. But it certainly helps if you remember that it's all about a dead person. Whereas
Well, sure. I mean, it shifts gears to politics, but then it also shifts again into these people being paid by memes and the sweat.
Yeah.
This sweatshop where they're producing memes. And then it shifts to the election rigging and this referendum that's been called about this emotion exploit and whether they're going to keep using it or not. And then it shifts into a coup d'etat, spoiler at the end. So...
And Joel's ability to connect to another person.
Yes.
Like to actually emotionally, romantically, platonically, whatever it may be, to be connected to somebody and then belong to someone. As in, like, she belongs to something in this life. Because through her blackness, through her being exposed to violence, or enacting violence, or condoning violence, or being complicit in violence, she's been othered herself. And finally, she finds common cause or communion with someone in this story. And then there's the relationship with her father, which is sort of teased and sort of comes back. So this idea of connection. And I think that's all great stuff. But it's like a kid at the pick and mix, grabbing all these cool things,
I think this is a comic. I think this is a novelist come to comics or screenwriter comes to comics thing, and they do think they can kind of do everything. I feel like I've seen this before from others that have come from outside.
Keep it simple.
Yeah, and draw one action per panel. That kind of nuts and bolts stuff kind of needs to be there first, maybe. But overall, I think it's a really interesting comic. And there's a there's a scene where she has slept with one of the counselors, and somebody calls her on it and thinks her judgment has been impaired. And she delivers a line, "You think my judgment has been impaired by alien peen," which is the funniest line I've read in any comic in maybe the last couple of years. And there was some funny lines, and there were some good lines in here. And Joe's dialogue I liked especially. I wasn't so sure about the aliens because they all seem to have very emotional dialogue when they weren't supposed to be feeling any emotions. And even with the family of the person who's been murdered at one stage says, "Damn, I can't even grieve." Well, the word damn implies you're angry, and can't even grieve implies you want to grieve, which is a desire. It's an emotion of desire to feel something. So every time the aliens spoke, it always was like, you're feeling lots of things. And it was almost like, it was weird. It was I was scratching my head the whole time about that. But I loved her dialogue throughout and her first person narration throughout. I don't know what it is. It's almost like a Green Lantern journal or mission log of some sort. I thought all that stuff was really good, and I thought we had a lot of insight. Again, we don't know why she became a cop, but I do like the idea that the willpower of her ring that she uses to power her ring is the will to push towards a goal. I think the words they use are the will to live with fear and push towards a goal over years against a whole society. And I did like that thematically, and I did like that about her character. Okay, any final thoughts last words we want to say about this?
Well, quickly before we wrap up, I did want to throw at you other authors who've done comics.
Okay.
Marjorie Liu.
Okay.
I've had the advantage of reading some of her novels as well as her comics.
Yeah.
I think she's really good at it.
Yeah.
I think she's the most, out of all the authors I'm going to mention now, I think she's the most natural fit.
Okay. I remembered another one too. I'm gonna counter with that. But anyway, go ahead.
Jonathan Lethem.
Okay.
Now, I read his novel Fortress of Solitude, which was full of references to 70s Marvel comics, including Omega the Unknown. And the story goes, I believe, Marvel noticed this and they asked him to do Omega the Unknown.
Okay.
And he did with, Dalrymple?
Yeah.
Farrell Dalrymple. And I've read it.
And a moment of Gary Panther in there, too.
Oh, yeah, I've forgotten. And I've read that book, and it's extraordinary, but it's deeply weird. And I feel as if he leaned into the fantasy of being able to do whatever you want in the comic. Like I don't think he restrained the comic to his style. I think he allowed himself to just go explore whatever he could do. I think that's an interesting approach. But his Omega the Unknown is not a book a lot of people have read.
Right.
I think that's a fair comment. But it's interesting. It's really interesting. Although the sad, end to that story is that Gerber basically, I think Gerber begged him not to do it.
Right.
And he did anyway.
Wow.
Because Gerber was like, if you respect me, please don't do this because these people.
Wow. Didn't know that. Okay.
Really screwed him over. I haven't read any Chuck Palahniuk's stuff for Fight Club, and I'm not going to, for reasons we don't need to get into on this recording.
Yeah.
And Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Right, of course, yeah.
Now, I haven't read his Captain America stuff, but I remember reading his Black Panther stuff and being a little at a loss.
Yeah, Tim was underwhelmed by it too.
Yeah, and I love Black Panther, and I love Christopher Priest's stuff on Black Panther, and Kirby's stuff, and it's really interesting too. And I thought there was another Panther book I really liked. It wasn't by any of those people I've already mentioned, but Ta-Nehisi Coates, I felt as if that he did the thing which Jemisin does very slight amount of, but not to the same extent, where at times you feel like you're reading an essay. And some writers can get away with that, but because in being didactic, they are also very entertaining.
Right.
And let's pull it out of the fire here, Kumar. Our one reference per episode, Alan Moore. He can do that.
Yeah.
He can give you we talked about Providence for this show. Providence is a lecture.
Yeah.
Particularly the last issue is a lecture about Lovecraft. But you're watching.
You had a Lovecraft reference too. That's in there.
Sorry?
Alan Moore once per episode, Lovecraft once per episode. So
there you go. I got a twofer. Oh, everyone have a drink. Who are you going to mention?
I was going to say Nancy Collins.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, and we're going to get to Nancy Collins. We're going to get to her because she I didn't even know she was a novelist when I read her run on Swamp Thing, and it was great.
But she adapted her own prose into comics.
She did that as well, yeah. So she knows what she's doing. And Michael Chabon is another guy that went from novel full of comics stuff into writing some actual comics.
So I knew he did the films. I knew he was involved in Spider-Man stuff. What comics did he write? He did Cavalier and Clay. He adapted Cavalier and Clay.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah. Okay, so I think of all that stuff, I think Jemisin is... I hope she writes some more comics.
She's up at the top. She's top tier. I think she has more of a sense of breakdowns. She's more of a sense of dynamism, of collaborating with the artist.
Yes.
I just felt at times they were slightly out of step. But just for the sake of the listener, I don't want it to seem like I'm criticizing the book. I think it's a really interesting, engaging, smart, ambitious book. And
ambitious is the best. Ambitious is the best word for it, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I think it ran out of runway.
Yeah.
At a certain point. But the plane still took off.
Yes.
Maybe a little shaken, but it took off. To brutalize the metaphor.
Okay, perfect. Let's leave it there. We'll leave it with the plane taking off.
Far Sector is published by DC Comics. You can help Deconstructing Comics and all our podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, How Much Stan Can You Stand returns. as Emmet and I review Stan Lee's 2002 memoir with George Mayer, Excelsior. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.